The main barn at Silver Creek Ranch was buzzing with anticipation. Under yellow lights hanging from aged wooden beams, a striking black stallion with a white star on its forehead stood proudly in the center ring. Ranchers, investors, and wealthy cattlemen, most of them in crisp plaid shirts and polished boots, watched quietly as Merrill Boyd, the auctioneer, introduced the horse as the crown jewel of the evening. In this place, respect was measured in bloodlines, pedigree, and big money. Then, the barn doors creaked open. A man stepped inside, moving slowly, holding a battered hat in both hands. His coat was worn and dusty, jeans torn at the knees, boots scuffed to the soles. His long beard and tangled hair made him look like he hadn't seen a warm bed in weeks. He didn't belong there, but the way he walked, steady and calm, forced people to look twice. He stopped near the ring, eyes locked on the horse. "Hey, get that guy outta here!" barked Bo Strickland, a powerful ranch owner known across Texas for his money and his temper. A security guard stepped forward, but the man raised his voice before being touched. "I'd like to make an offer. $100,000. The room went dead silent. Then came the low hum of whispers, followed by laughter. Merrill hesitated. Bo let out a sharp laugh. "You serious? You don't look like you've got $100, much less $100,000. The man didn't flinch. "I can wire the funds right now. Just hand me a phone." Bo scoffed. "You smell like you crawled out of a ditch. This is a high-end auction, not a soup kitchen." But something about the stranger's steady tone made people uneasy. The stallion took a cautious step toward the man, its ears perked. There was an energy in the air no one could explain. In the middle of the commotion, something slipped from the man's coat and hit the dirt floor with a thud, a worn leather wallet. It popped open, revealing a gleaming nameplate, Hollis McCain, a name tied to one of the largest agricultural investment firms in the southern United States. The silence deepened. From the back of the barn, an old rancher named Otis Dunbar leaned toward the man next to him and whispered, "I'll be damned. That's Hollis McCain. I thought he disappeared years ago." As Hollis was dragged out, he never took his eyes off the stallion. The horse let out a loud snort, stomping its hooves. Everyone in that barn felt it. Something wasn't right. What began as an awkward moment was about to become the most shocking twist Silver Creek had ever seen. Outside the barn, Hollis McCain stood silently near the gravel path, brushing dust off his coat as the late evening wind swept across the open Texas fields. The security guard who had escorted him out paused for a moment, watching him with uncertainty. There was something unsettling about how calm the old man remained. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't angry. He looked focused, like this had all gone according to plan. Back inside, the mood had shifted. Bo Strickland paced near the edge of the auction ring, visibly rattled. Did anyone know who that guy was? He barked to no one in particular. Merrill Boyd stood behind the podium, tapping his fingers on the wood, deep in thought. He had worked these auctions for 30 years and had seen more than his share of eccentric bidders. But this? A man presumed to be a drifter turning out to be Hollis McCain, one of the most mysterious names in Southern ranching finance? That wasn't something you saw every day. Otis Dunbar sat quietly near the back of the barn, eyes narrowed. He hadn't spoken to Hollis in decades, but he remembered the man well, young, ambitious, and sharp as a blade. Rumor had it that Hollis had walked away from the business world after a bitter family betrayal. Some said he'd lost everything. Others believed he had simply vanished, disgusted with the greed and politics of high-stakes ranching. Either way, seeing him again, dressed like a homeless man, bidding on a champion stallion, didn't sit right. Merrill finally cleared his throat and stepped up to the mic. "Folks, let's bring the next horse out," he said, voice a bit strained. But people weren't listening. They whispered to each other, some even walking toward the barn doors to get a better look at the man who had just been thrown out. Bo tried to act like it didn't bother him, but anyone watching closely could see the tension in his jaw. Outside, Hollis pulled a small, old flip phone from his coat pocket and pressed a few buttons. Within seconds, a call connected. "Yeah," he said softly, "it's done. Just like we discussed. I'm heading to the truck." His voice was low but confident. He walked toward a beat-up pickup parked just beyond the fence line. One that, upon closer inspection, had military-grade security glass and a satellite antenna tucked behind the cab. As he climbed into the truck, Hollis looked back toward the barn one last time. His eyes weren't bitter, they were calculating. This wasn't just about a horse. Something much deeper was unfolding, and Bo Strickland was at the center of it. Hollis hadn't come to buy a stallion. He'd come to uncover the truth. The sun had long dipped below the horizon, casting a dark blue haze over the open plains of Silver Creek. Inside the barn, the auction continued, but the excitement had vanished. Merrill Boyd went through the motions, announcing bids with less conviction, while most of the audience seemed more concerned with the name that still echoed in their minds, Hollis McCain. A name tied to old wealth, old wounds, and secrets the ranching world had tried to forget. Bo Strickland stood in a corner near the stables, speaking harshly into his phone. "No, I don't know how the hell he found out. He was supposed to be gone. You told me he disappeared for good." His voice dropped to a whisper. "If he digs, this whole deal comes apart. You know that." He ended the call with a slam of his flip phone, unaware that Otis Dunbar, still seated quietly in the shadows, had heard every word. Otis hadn't moved much, but his mind was racing. Back in the 80s, he and Hollis had been allies in the early days of cattle financing, until something bad, had forced Hollis to walk away from it all. There were whispers back then, rigged deals, stolen property lines, and threats that reached as far as the state capitol. Otis had always suspected Bo had something to do with Hollis's disappearance from the scene, but no one could prove it. Now, the past was walking back through the door in dusty boots and a worn-out coat. Outside the barn, Hollis sat in his truck, reviewing old documents on a tablet that had been hidden beneath the passenger seat. The glow from the screen lit up his weathered face. Deeds, contracts, and land transfers, some of them altered, others erased entirely. He paused at a name, Evelyn Strickland, Bo's late wife. Her signature appeared on a document Hollis remembered drafting himself years ago, but the version in his file was different. Someone had forged her approval on a land grab that had cost Hollis everything. His hand clenched the steering wheel. He wasn't just here to stir trouble, he had evidence. Enough to expose Bo, not just to the community, but to the state authorities. But timing mattered. If he moved too fast, Bo would bury it all again. He needed someone inside, someone who could confirm what he already knew. Back inside, Merrill Boyd leaned over to Otis and whispered, "You think he's coming back?" Otis kept his eyes on Bo, who now looked more agitated than ever. "Oh, he's not just coming back," Otis said softly. "He's been planning this for years. And Bo, that man's about to lose everything." The next morning broke cold and gray. Fog clung low to the fields of Silver Creek, blurring the horizon like a veil over old memories. Inside his modest motel room on the edge of town, Hollis McCain sat at a small desk, stacks of paper spread out before him. He sipped weak coffee from a chipped ceramic mug as his eyes scanned a document he'd read dozens of times. His hand hovered over one signature, the one he knew had changed his life forever. Evelyn Strickland. But now he was sure, it wasn't hers. The motel room smelled of dust and old pine cleaner, but Hollis barely noticed. His mind replayed every conversation from years ago. Evelyn had been different from Bo, sharp, kind, and quietly loyal. She had once confided in Hollis about her doubts concerning some of Bo's business ventures. She feared Bo had been manipulating land deals behind her back. Hollis had warned her to be careful, but soon after, she had stopped answering his calls. Months later, she was gone. The official story was illness, but it had never sat right with him. At the ranch, Bo Strickland stood on his back porch, a tumbler of whiskey in hand, staring out at the paddocks. He hadn't slept. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "You and I have unfinished business. You know where to find me." His hand tightened around the glass. The message didn't need a name. He knew it was Hollis. Bo's mind spun through the possibilities. If Hollis had documents, if he had proof, he'd have to silence him again. This time, permanently. Meanwhile, back at the barn, Otis Dunbar stood beside Merrill Boyd, both men watching as the auction staff cleaned up the remnants of last night's chaos. Merrill spoke in a low voice. "You think Hollis has something real?" Otis nodded. "I don't think I know. And if that paper trail leads where I think it does, Bo's empire is built on stolen land and lies." Merrill exhaled slowly. "You ever seen Bo scared before?" Otis didn't answer. He just kept watching the gate, as if expecting someone to walk through at any moment. Later that afternoon, Hollis sat in his truck, parked at the old fairgrounds just outside town, the place where he and Bo had once made their first land deal. He had brought copies of the documents and his notes. He wasn't hiding anymore. He sent another message, "Meet me here. Tonight. No lawyers. No lies." The clock was ticking. If Bo didn't come to him, Hollis would go public. But deep down, he knew Bo wouldn't back down easily. This wasn't just about land or money anymore. It was about justice. And some ghosts wouldn't rest until the truth came to light. The sky over the old fairgrounds darkened early, heavy clouds rolling in as if nature itself sensed what was coming. Hollis McCain stood alone under the rusted canopy where livestock shows used to be held decades ago. He'd chosen this place for a reason. Neutral ground, forgotten by most, but not by Bo. The echo of their first partnership still lived in the cracked cement beneath his boots. He checked his watch. Bo was late. Typical. When headlights finally cut through the growing fog, Hollis didn't move. The black SUV pulled up slowly, its tires crunching over gravel. The engine idled for a moment before Bo Strickland stepped out, dressed in his usual pressed jeans and a worn leather vest. He looked older than the last time they'd stood face to face, but the arrogance in his eyes hadn't faded. "You always had a flair for drama," Bo said, walking closer, hands in his pockets. "So, what's all this really about?" Hollis held up a manila folder and tossed it onto the hood of Bo's SUV. "It's about this," he said flatly. "Land deeds. Forged signatures. Your wife's name where it never should have been. You stole from me, Bo. You used Evelyn's trust to take what wasn't yours." Bo stared at the folder, then let out a dry laugh. "You waited all these years just to cry about a few acres and a dead woman?" His voice had an edge, calculated, cold. "I waited," Hollis replied, stepping closer, "because I had nothing left to lose. You made sure of that. But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for the truth. And I think Evelyn would have wanted that, too." For a moment, the name hung heavy in the air between them. Bo's expression shifted, just slightly. Enough for Hollis to see it. Guilt. Real, flickering guilt, buried deep beneath years of denial and greed. Bo reached for the folder, flipping it open. He scanned the contents quickly, his jaw tightening. "You can't prove all this," he muttered. "Most of these people are dead. The rest won't talk." Hollis raised an eyebrow. "That's where you're wrong. Otis remembers. Merrill kept copies. And I still have the original contracts, signed in your handwriting." Silence fell over the fairgrounds. The only sound was the wind scraping through the empty bleachers. Bo looked at Hollis, the bravado fading. "So what now?" Hollis didn't answer right away. He simply turned and began walking back to his truck. "You've got one night," he said over his shoulder. One night to decide whether you want to lose your legacy quietly or publicly. Bo Strickland didn't go home that night. Instead, he drove aimlessly down the back roads that cut through the hills of Silver Creek, headlights slicing through the dark like a confession he couldn't escape. Hollis's words echoed in his ears, "Lose your legacy quietly or publicly." For the first time in years, Bo felt cornered, not by lawyers or rivals, but by truth. And that was the kind of enemy a man couldn't bargain with. He pulled into an old gas station just past midnight, the kind with a single flickering light and a rusted soda machine. Sitting in the driver's seat, Bo lit a cigarette with shaking hands, something he hadn't done in years. Images of Evelyn haunted him. Her laughter. Her suspicion. The last argument they had before she stopped trusting him. He'd told himself he did what he had to. Everyone did back then. But now, faced with proof and a man who'd been waiting decades to confront him, all those justifications felt paper-thin. At the motel, Hollis remained awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring out the window. He wasn't a man given to hope, but tonight felt different. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about closure, for Evelyn, for himself, and maybe even for Bo, if he had the courage to face it. On the nightstand sat a flash drive containing every document, every record, every voice memo tied to the land theft. In his coat pocket, a sealed letter addressed to the local newspaper editor, just in case Bo chose silence. Meanwhile, Otis Dunbar sat on his porch with a whiskey bottle and an old photo in his hand. It was a picture from 1982, him, Hollis, and Bo at the county fair, all smiles, all dreams. How far they'd come, and how far they'd fallen. He knew the town needed to hear the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. And if Hollis pushed forward, Otis was ready to back him, publicly. As dawn approached, Bo finally returned to his ranch. The house was quiet, filled with the kind of silence that made a man reflect on his own ghosts. He poured a drink but didn't touch it. Instead, he sat at his kitchen table and opened the folder Hollis had left once more. The names. The dates. Evelyn's forged signature staring back at him like an accusation from the grave. He dropped his head into his hands. The weight was crushing. Then, slowly, Bo stood up. He reached for his phone, not to call a lawyer or bury the truth, but to call Merrill Boyd. His voice was hoarse when Merrill answered. "I need to speak at the town council meeting," Bo said. "Tonight. And I need Hollis to be there." The town hall was fuller than it had been in years. Word had spread fast. Bo Strickland had requested to speak at the council meeting, and he had asked Hollis McCain to be present. No one knew exactly what it meant, but people canceled dinner plans and church group meetings just to be there. The air buzzed with curiosity, suspicion, and the faint scent of old wood and coffee. Hollis arrived quietly, wearing the same worn coat he'd worn to the auction, but this time, people didn't laugh or whisper behind his back. They stepped aside. Some nodded. Others just stared. He took a seat in the third row, a manila folder resting on his lap, the flash drive in his pocket. Beside him, Otis Dunbar sat tall and calm, like a silent witness to everything that had come before and everything still to come. At exactly 6 p.m., Bo walked into the room. His shoulders weren't slumped, but they weren't squared either. He looked like a man who hadn't slept, who had made peace with something heavy during the night. The mayor greeted him with a cautious nod. The council members shifted in their seats. Merrill Boyd stood near the back, arms crossed, watching with eyes that had seen too much to be easily surprised. Bo cleared his throat as he stepped up to the podium. He didn't read from a paper. He didn't have a lawyer with him. "A long time ago," he began, "I made choices I'm not proud of. I let ambition take the place of honesty. And in doing that, I betrayed a friend and my wife." A murmur swept through the room. Bo's voice cracked slightly. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness. I'm here to tell the truth, because it's time." He looked out at the crowd, then directly at Hollis. "Hollis McCain lost everything because of me. And I let him. I forged documents, used Evelyn's name without her knowing. I took land that didn't belong to me." His voice steadied. "And now, I'm ready to give it back. All of it." Gasps rippled through the room. Otis closed his eyes for a moment, as if releasing a breath he'd held for years. But Bo wasn't done. This town deserves better than secrets. And so did Evelyn. He stepped down from the podium and walked directly to Hollis. For a moment, no one moved. Then Bo extended his hand. Hollis looked at it, then slowly rose from his seat. He didn't shake it, not yet. But he met Bo's eyes with a quiet intensity. The town watched in silence, knowing something monumental had just shifted, but not knowing what came next. The silence after Bo's confession didn't last long. As soon as the town council meeting ended, the room erupted into low murmurs and hurried conversations. People surrounded Bo, asking questions, demanding answers. Some were angry, others just stunned. But Hollis McCain didn't stick around to watch the chaos unfold. He quietly walked out the side door with Otis Dunbar, the folder still tucked under his arm. Outside, the night air felt heavy. Hollis lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, not from nerves, but from the sheer weight of release. "I didn't expect him to actually say it," he muttered. Otis looked over at him. "Neither did I," he said. "But you cornered him, Hollis. You held up a mirror, and he finally looked into it." For a moment, they just stood there, two old men weathered by time and memory, watching the stars struggle through the cloudy Texas sky. Back inside, Merrill Boyd had taken control of the meeting again, working with the council to review the land titles and what legal action needed to follow. Everything Bo confessed would have to be verified, and there were decades of records to examine. Lawyers would be called. Judges would be notified. But the wheels had already started turning, and nothing would stop them now. Bo, meanwhile, had driven back to his ranch in silence. He didn't turn on the radio or answer his phone. The house felt different now, colder, emptier. He wandered into the study where Evelyn's old books still sat on the shelves, untouched since the day she passed. He pulled one down, opened the front cover, and found her handwriting, "To Bo, keep your soul honest." He sank into the leather chair and wept, not out of guilt, but out of grief. For Evelyn. For the man he used to be. For all the years he couldn't get back. The following morning, the front page of the local paper featured one bold headline: "Strickland confesses to decades-old land fraud. McCain vindicated." A photo of Hollis leaving town hall, unreadable expression on his face, sat just below the headline. For the townspeople, it was a scandal. For Hollis, it was something else entirely: closure. But not everyone was satisfied. As Hollis packed up his things at the motel, a man in a suit knocked on his door. He introduced himself as a state investigator. "Mr. McCain, we believe this case could involve more than just Strickland. If you're willing to testify, this could go all the way to Austin." Hollis looked down at his battered duffel bag, then out the window toward the fields. He had opened a door he never thought he'd walk through again. And now, even bigger truths were waiting on the other side. The investigator's card sat on the motel nightstand, untouched for hours. Hollis McCain sat in silence, his duffel bag still half-packed on the bed. Outside, the Texas wind rustled the branches of a dry oak, but inside, everything was still. He had thought his mission was over. Bo had confessed. The town knew the truth. But now, faced with the possibility of exposing a deeper, statewide conspiracy, Hollis wasn't sure if he had the strength to start over again. His fingers brushed over the edges of the manila folder one last time. The documents inside weren't just about Bo. As he had dug deeper over the past weeks, he'd found connections, names, companies, state officials who had looked the other way. deals that reached far beyond Silver Creek. What Bo had done was terrible. But what others had allowed to happen in silence, that was systemic. And now, with the state investigator knocking, Hollis had a choice: retreat into the quiet peace he'd earned, or fight for something much bigger. That evening, he drove out to Otis Dunbar's ranch without calling first. Otis was on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the sunset roll across the fields like an old film. "Didn't think I'd see you again so soon," Otis said. Hollis sat down beside him, resting his elbows on his knees. "They want me to testify," he said. "The state's digging now. They think Bo's just the start." Otis didn't flinch. "You thinking about doing it?" Hollis nodded slowly. "I am. But I'd be dragging up a lot of dirt. And not just his." Otis took a long breath. Sometimes the land has to be turned over before something new can grow. He looked at Hollis with the weight of shared history. "You didn't survive all this just to stop when the truth finally has teeth." Hollis knew he was right. But the fear was real, not for himself, but for what the fight might cost others. Bo had already fallen. Would the rest of the house of cards collapse, or bury more lives in the rubble? As the sun dipped low behind the hills, Hollis looked out at the wide, open land. He remembered being a younger man, ambitious, hopeful, foolish. He never thought life would bring him back here, not like this. And yet, here he was, holding evidence that could shake the entire ranching industry to its core. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was unfinished business. Or maybe some truths just refused to stay buried. He pulled out his phone, stared at the investigator's number, and hit call. The voice on the other end answered, "McCain?" Hollis cleared his throat. "Yeah, I'm in. Let's finish this." 3 months later, the courtroom in Austin was packed. News crews lined the back wall, their cameras capturing every movement, every pause. The state had launched a formal investigation into fraudulent land deals dating back over 2 decades, and it all began with one man's testimony. Hollis McCain sat in the witness chair, steady, calm, and unshaken, as he told the truth he had carried for most of his life. Names were named. Documents presented. Faces in the crowd turned pale. Bo Strickland sat quietly at the defense table, older somehow than just a few months before. His empire had crumbled. Most of his land had been seized. Several of his former partners had already flipped, testifying in hopes of leniency. Yet Bo never looked away from Hollis during the entire testimony. There was no yelling, no denial, just silence, like a man who had finally run out of excuses. In his eyes, there was no fight left, only regret. When the trial ended, the judge ordered restitution, land reversals, and ongoing investigations into other high-ranking officials. For many in the courtroom, it was a victory of law and justice. But for Hollis, it felt like something quieter, something deeper. It wasn't about headlines or revenge. It was about finally releasing the burden he had carried alone for far too long. Back in Silver Creek, the mood had changed. Where once his name had been spoken with pity or mockery, now people nodded in respect when Hollis passed by. The town had been forced to look at its own shadows, and some didn't like what they saw. But others, especially the younger generation, saw it as a reckoning, a chance to build something honest from the ashes of old power. One crisp morning, Hollis returned to the edge of the field where it had all started, the auction barn, now empty and silent. He stood there for a long time, watching the wind stir the dust. Otis Dunbar pulled up in his truck and joined him, handing him a cup of coffee. "So what now?" Otis asked. Hollis took a sip, eyes on the horizon. "Now? I rest. I breathe. I live like a man who finally stopped running." Otis smiled. "You've earned that." As they stood side by side, watching the sky turn gold over Silver Creek, Hollis felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind born from speaking the truth, no matter how heavy it was. The land around him hadn't changed, but he had, and maybe that was enough.